The hallway at Brookside Elementary was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't belong in a school. The kind that made a trained man's spine straighten. Officer Logan Hale stood just outside room 4B, one boot planted, the other half turned, like his body was deciding whether to walk away or step in. Through the narrow slit of the door left ajar, he could see his foster son, Mason Carter, sitting at the back of the room. Small, withdrawn, shoulders hunched beneath the hood of a navy sweatshirt. Ms. Dalton, the teacher, leaned in close to him. Too close. Mason flinched. That tiny movement hit Logan harder than any scream could have. He'd seen soldiers do the same thing before an ambush, tighten like a wire stretched too far. Behind him, Ranger let out a low, visceral growl. It wasn't loud. It was barely audible. But it vibrated deep, like the sound a storm makes just before lightning hits. The German shepherd's ears were pinned forward, eyes sharp, locked on the scene through the glass. Ms. Dalton's lips moved. Her hand rested lightly on Mason's back. Mason didn't look up. Logan opened the door. "Officer Hale," Ms. Dalton said, instantly upright, her voice coated in a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "We were just finishing up some extra math help." Mason got a little emotional. "It happens sometimes." He's very sensitive. Logan didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to Mason. The boy's hands were wrapped in gauze, fresh, clean. One corner was beginning to spot red. "You okay, bud?" Logan asked, voice quiet. Mason nodded too quickly, eyes avoiding him. "Yeah, just tired." Ranger moved before Logan did. The dog stepped into the room with calm, deliberate confidence, padded over to Mason's desk, and nosed gently under the edge of the chair. Then, without warning, Ranger stepped back and pawed once under the desk. Something caught. A folded slip of paper peeked out from the gap in the metal grate. Ranger tugged. The note slid free, half crumpled, the scrawl uneven and faintly smudged. Logan crouched, took the paper from Ranger's mouth, and unfolded it. His gut was already tightening before he even saw the words. "She hurts me when no one sees." For a second, Logan couldn't breathe. He didn't show it. Years in the field had taught him how to mask everything. Pain, rage, heartbreak. But Ranger didn't need him to say a word. The dog turned to Miss Dalton and stared. Ms. Dalton's smile froze. I don't know what that is," she said, recovering fast. "Probably something from earlier. Kids write all kinds of dramatic things. You know how it is." Logan rose, slow and steady, like a man stepping into a storm he knew was coming. "I'd like Mason to grab his things," he said simply. "Of course." Ms. Dalton gave Mason a quick nod, her voice now tightly controlled. "Mason, go ahead." Mason slid from his seat. As he passed Ranger, the dog pressed gently against his side, not pushing, anchoring. Mason's hand dropped, brushing the top of Ranger's head, and some of the tremble in his shoulders eased. Logan waited until they were both in the hallway before closing the door behind them. He didn't slam it, but the sound of the latch clicking echoed longer than it should have. "Did she touch you?" Logan asked, crouching so he could look Mason in the eye. Mason shook his head too fast. "No, she talks weird. Says things when no one's around." Logan didn't press. "Not here, not yet." He reached down, ruffled Ranger's fur between the ears. "Good boy," he murmured. Ranger huffed once, ears flicking back like he understood the weight of the moment. They walked the hallway in silence, the kind that settled over you like snowfall, soft but heavy. At the front office, Logan signed Mason out. Ms. Ridge, the secretary, glanced up and said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the boy's bandaged hands, then to Ranger, then quickly away. Logan could feel the currents under the surface now. Teachers with too perfect records, classrooms that stayed too quiet, kids with watchful eyes. Something was wrong here. He just hadn't seen it clearly until the dog did. Outside, the cruiser waited in the staff lot. Wind rustled the flag at half-mast, though there was no official mourning. The sky was clear but colourless, drained of everything but the sharp edges of light. In the car, Mason stayed silent. He clutched Ranger's harness from the back seat, eyes distant, like he was counting miles to some safer place. "You ever write something like that before?" Logan asked, easing onto the road. Mason hesitated. "No." Logan gave him space. "You didn't get that idea from TV," he said after a pause. "No," Mason whispered. "I got it from remembering." Logan didn't ask what that meant. He just nodded, jaw tightening, and turned on the cruiser's signal. The school slipped into the rear view, but the note, tucked into his pocket now, might as well have been burned into his hand. Ranger gave a low breath from the passenger seat. Not tired, watchful. In the silence, Logan spoke aloud, mostly to himself. "We're going to find out the truth." "All of it from the back," Mason said softly. "Even if no one believes it?" Logan met Ranger's eyes in the mirror. The dog's ears flicked back, then forward, listening. "They'll believe," Logan said, "because this time you've got witnesses." "Me?" And him, Ranger gave a short, deliberate bark. Not loud, just enough. The kind of bark that said, "I saw it, I know, and I'm not backing down." The hallway outside the ER reeked of antiseptic and unfinished prayers. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly blue tint on the polished floor. Officer Logan Hale leaned against the wall near room 12C, his uniform jacket folded over one arm, his eyes fixed on the stillness beyond the glass door. Inside the room, Lauren Carter lay motionless except for the steady click of the heart monitor. Her face was pale, lips cracked, breath shallow like a tide refusing to come in fully. Her hair, once auburn and full of defiance, was now limp against the hospital pillow. One IV line ran down her arm. The other had already been pulled. The nurse had said quietly, "You should go in." She asked for you. Logan had stepped into gunfire before, into back alleys, collapsed buildings, burning wrecks. But walking into that room had taken more courage than any of them. Mason, only 7 at the time, was asleep in a chair in the corner, curled around a backpack that had seen better days. A dented toy robot poked from the zipper. He was wearing shoes too small and a hoodie with the sleeves chewed at the cuffs. Lauren's eyes fluttered open when Logan stepped close. "You came," she rasped, her voice barely audible. Logan nodded. "I told you I would." Lauren tried to smile. It didn't hold. "You know, I don't have anyone left," she said, her eyes flickering toward her son. "My sister's a nurse in another town. Barely keeps up with her own life. Mason, he's always been quiet. But he's smart. Too smart. He sees everything." She coughed, and the sound seemed to shake her whole frame. Logan reached for a glass of water, held it to her lips. She sipped, then rested back. "I want you to take him," she said flatly. "Not because you're a cop. Not because you saved my life 2 years ago when I overdosed the first time. But because I saw how you looked at him. How he looked at you." Logan froze. "Lauren, that's not something I can just—" "You already did," she whispered. "You just haven't said yes out loud yet." He looked at the boy in the corner, face soft in sleep. Then back to Lauren. "You know what this means, right?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "It means I can let go." A silence stretched between them. Then Logan said, with the same voice he once used to promise a dying soldier in Afghanistan that he'd get the letter home, "I'll raise him like my own." Lauren's eyes filled, not with tears, but with release. "I don't need perfect," she whispered. "I just need safe." Moments later, a nurse came in. The heart monitor slowed. One long, flat tone followed. Mason didn't wake when they called time of death, but he woke when Logan knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "She's gone?" the boy asked. Logan didn't answer. He just nodded. Mason didn't cry. He didn't speak. He pressed his head into Logan's chest like he'd been doing it his whole life, and Logan wrapped both arms around him like he never planned to let go. 3 weeks later, Mason's small suitcase sat by the doorway of Logan's home on Fairview Street. It was a modest one-story house clapboard siding, faded green shutters, a porch swing that creaked even when still. In the living room, Tessa Hale, Logan's younger sister, adjusted the throw pillows on the couch for the 3rd time. She was in her mid-40s, tall and wiry, with the sharp hands of a nurse and the eyes of someone who'd seen too much in trauma wards. "You sure about this?" she asked, straightening. Logan nodded. "As sure as I've been about anything." "And the dog?" she asked, glancing toward the hallway. At that moment, Ranger rounded the corner. He was a thick-coated German shepherd with a sable saddle, piercing amber eyes, and a gait that moved like memory-smooth, precise, never wasted. A shallow scar ran down the ridge of his nose, a souvenir from a collapsed search and rescue wall in his military days. He walked up to Mason, paused, then sat down without a command. Mason looked at him. Ranger looked back. The boy reached out a hesitant hand and brushed the dog's shoulder. Ranger did not flinch. That night, Mason set his robot on the nightstand and lay staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled like fabric softener. The house was quiet in the way unfamiliar places are quiet, too still, too clean, too uncertain. In the hallway, Ranger lay at the door. "Is he always like that?" Mason asked softly. Logan, standing at the doorway, tilted his head. "Like what?" "Waiting. He's been through more than most." Logan said, "He waits because he knows what it's like when someone doesn't come back." Mason turned his face into the pillow. Logan watched him a moment longer, then stepped out. Later that night, after the boy had drifted to sleep, Tessa poured 2 cups of tea and sat beside Logan at the kitchen table. "You've changed," she said quietly. Logan glanced at her. "Since when?" "Since Afghanistan. Since Ranger. Since that hallway with the Carter girl." Logan didn't answer. Ranger, sensing the shift in tone, lifted his head from where he lay at Logan's feet. "I'm not saying it's bad," Tessa added. "I'm saying it's the first time I've seen you breathe." Logan looked at the leather notebook resting near his cup. He hadn't written in it since Lauren's funeral. He opened to a new page. April 27th, Mason moved in. First night. Scared, but holding it. Ranger stayed by his door. Not assigned. Chose it. Down the hallway, the boy rolled over in bed, murmuring something inaudible. The dog didn't move, but his ears flicked once, listening. Later, as the wind pushed through the trees outside, Logan stood at Mason's doorway. The boy slept with one hand on the edge of the bed, fingers dangling towards the floor. Ranger lay beside it. Logan whispered softly into the stillness. "I promised her you'd be safe." Ranger shifted, sighed once, and closed his eyes. Some promises, Logan thought, don't need to be spoken again. They're kept in the breath, in the blood, and in the heartbeat of a dog that never forgets. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and roasted chicken, but neither scent did much to cut the tension in the room. Outside, dusk wrapped itself around the house on Fairview Street, casting long shadows that crept through the window blinds. Mason sat at the table, his sleeves rolled down, fingers picking at the frayed hem of his sweatshirt. His backpack lay by the door, lopsided and half-zipped. Ranger sat a few feet away, eyes fixed on the boy, not hovering, not intruding, just present, like he always was. Tessa Hale moved through the room with quiet efficiency, the practiced calm of a nurse who had spent too many years in triage. She carried the small first aid kit in one hand and a cup of chamomile tea in the other. Her brow was furrowed, but her voice stayed light. "Let me see your hands, kiddo." Mason hesitated, then slowly extended both arms across the table. The sweatshirt sleeves slid up an inch, revealing gauze on both hands, frayed at the edges, the tape peeling. Tessa clicked her tongue softly. "Didn't we just change these 2 days ago?" "I fell," Mason said quickly, "in gym. Dodgeball." "Both hands?" she asked, brow arching. "Yeah, I tried to catch 2 balls at once." Tessa met Logan's eyes across the kitchen. Logan didn't speak, but something in his jaw tightened. Ranger stood, stretched once, and walked over to Mason. The boy looked down at him, eyes wary. The dog sniffed the gauze, then gently pressed his snout against Mason's wrist. He huffed once. Mason flinched. "Sorry," he whispered. Ranger pulled back, sat, and tilted his head. Not accusing, just watching. Tessa peeled back the first layer of gauze. The cloth lifted reluctantly, revealing a cluster of small welts, some red and raw, others faint yellow and healing. A few were almost symmetrical, too evenly spaced to be random. One bruise bore the faint imprint of a fingernail crescent. Tessa's lips thinned. She cleaned each mark carefully, silently, her hands steady but her shoulders tense. "These don't look like dodgeball injuries," she said at last. Mason didn't answer. He looked at the floor, then at Ranger, then at nothing. "I tripped," he murmured. The floor was slippery. Was it the floor? Logan said, voice even. Or was it someone's hand? Mason went quiet. Tessa didn't push. She just reached for fresh gauze and started wrapping again, her touch light but sure. Ranger exhaled and lay down beside the chair, tail curling around his paws. He didn't take his eyes off Mason. Logan pulled out his worn leather notebook and flipped to a clean page. He uncapped his pen like it was part of a drill. "Date?" Tessa asked, barely above a whisper. "Today's the 8th. Logan replied. He wrote, May 8th. Subject, Mason Carter, visible injuries, knuckles, inner palm, left wrist. Reported cause, fall during gym. Observed reality, bruises inconsistent with explanation. Multiple stages of healing. Patterned. Fingernail mark present. Mason glanced up as the pen scratched across the page. "You're writing it down?" he asked. Logan nodded. "Because I want to remember exactly what's happening. So if anyone asks, I don't guess." Mason bit the inside of his cheek. "Will it help?" "Sometimes the truth needs help standing up." Logan said, "That's what the notebook's for." "And Ranger." Logan looked at the dog. "He's here to notice what we miss." Ranger didn't move, but his ears flicked in acknowledgement. After dinner, Mason went to his room early. The door didn't close all the way. Logan noticed, and he left it that way. In the living room, Tessa sat with a mug of tea, her legs tucked under her. Logan was at the table again, going over his notes from earlier in the week. "Third time this month," she said quietly. "I know. I've worked in hospitals long enough to know what patterned bruises mean." Logan tapped his pen against the notebook. "I asked Principal Delaney last week about the gym program. He said they're PE teachers on maternity leave. They've been using classroom teachers for coverage." Tessa sat up straighter. "So who's been taking them?" Logan looked at her. "Miss Dalton." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Logan reached for the manila folder he'd kept near the fridge. He pulled out a few pages, a nurse's incident report from 3 weeks ago, when Mason had come home with a twisted ankle. A note from a substitute teacher apologizing for a disciplinary misunderstanding. A photocopy of the form Lauren Carter had signed in the hospital, granting him temporary guardianship. The puzzle pieces weren't fitting yet, but the corners were starting to show. Later that night, Mason stirred in his sleep. Ranger rose from the hallway and padded silently into the boy's room. The dog lay beside the bed, close enough for his body heat to reach the child, but far enough not to crowd. Mason's hand dropped over the side of the mattress and landed on Ranger's back. The boy didn't wake, but his fingers curled slightly into the thick fur. Logan stood in the doorway, just watching. Then he stepped back into the kitchen and flipped open the notebook again. He wrote one more line. Instinct says it's her, but instinct doesn't win in court. Evidence does. He tapped the pen once, then underlined the word her. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch scraped softly against the roof. And in the dark, Ranger kept still, listening, waiting, guarding. The classroom smelled of glue sticks, poster paper, and something faintly metallic from the old heating vents that never quite shut off. Outside, wind scratched at the tall windows, but inside room 4B, the silence had a different edge, the kind that settled low in the gut, quiet but thick. On the chalkboard, written in neat cursive, was the day's assignment. Draw your dream place. Ms. Dalton had underlined the word dream 3 times in green. The desks were clustered in small groups. Students bent over their paper, brushes moving in strokes both timid and bold. Crayons rolled. Markers squeaked. But beneath it all, no one spoke above a whisper. Mason Carter sat near the supply shelf, hunched over his sheet of paper, arms folded close. His gauze-covered hands, now tucked under soft, fingerless gloves, trembled as he picked up the stub of a colored pencil. He hadn't drawn anything yet, just a blank white space staring back at him like a challenge he was already losing. The others were deep in their work. Zoe Harris drew a 2-story house with lavender shutters. Malik Patterson was shading a crooked tree with exaggerated roots. Kayla Ortiz pressed the tip of her crayon slowly, carefully, as though afraid the paper might break. Even Carlo Ruiz, usually all elbows and energy, was still, his tongue poking from the side of his mouth in concentration. Liam Chen sat at the back. His glasses slid halfway down his nose as he pressed record on the tiny device hidden beneath his desk. It was a pocket voice recorder old, wrapped in blue tape, the battery cover long gone. He'd found it in a drawer at home and tested it during breakfast. Now it blinked red quietly, aimed toward the center of the room. He hadn't told anyone. Not yet. A plastic cup sat at the edge of Mason's desk, filled halfway with rinse water stained red from previous brushings. As he reached for a fresh pencil, his elbow nudged the cup. The water tipped. It happened in a flash. A thin sheet of red water cascaded down the side of the desk, pooling on the floor. The sound was soft, but it was enough. All movement in the room stopped. Heads turned. Then came the click of heels. Ms. Dalton was beside Mason before the water even stopped spreading. Her hand reached out, not to help, not to clean, but to steady herself as she leaned close, her voice low and sharp, wrapped in syrup and venom. "Walking slow like your mother again, aren't you?" She whispered, her smile still perfectly placed. "Clumsy." "No wonder they pity you," Mason froze. His breath caught, shoulders twitching. Dalton's manicured finger reached out and pressed the edge of his mouth. Not hard, just enough to signal. "I can reach you whenever I want." The class stayed silent. Liam's pencil snapped in his grip, but he kept his eyes on his paper, pretending. Zoe's hand hovered above her drawing, the lavender shutter now smeared with uneven lines. Malik stared straight ahead, his brown hands clenched under the desk. Kayla blinked fast, her lower lip trembling. A tissue remained clenched in her palm, halfway raised but never offered. No one spoke. Mason grabbed the rag from the supply shelf and began to blot the puddle. His hands moved frantically, more desperate than efficient. The bandages beneath his gloves soaked through, turning a light, sickly pink. He kept wiping. Dalton stepped back. "Accidents happen," she announced to the room, voice bright now, warm again. "Let's all be more careful next time." Then she turned, gliding back to the front of the class as though nothing had happened. Her heels clicked like punctuation. At his desk, Liam reached under the table and pressed the save button. The blinking light stilled. He didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds. Across the room, Mason sat motionless, the rag limp in his hands. His drawing paper was soaked through. The red stain had bled into the white, spreading like a secret that refused to stay hidden. Zoe's hand moved again, but the lines she drew were now sharp and panicked. Malik abandoned his tree entirely. His eyes had lost focus. Carlo chewed the inside of his cheek until it bled faintly. No one dared look directly at Mason, but every one of them saw. The bell rang 20 minutes later, an echo that no one welcomed. As students packed up, their chairs scraped the floor in uneven patterns. Mason moved last, fingers shaking as he folded his ruined drawing. As he passed the trash can, Ranger's head suddenly appeared at the door. The German Shepherd stood at the classroom threshold, leash held loosely in Logan's hand. He wasn't supposed to be inside, but he stepped forward anyway. Mason saw him, dropped his ruined page, froze. Ranger approached slowly, nose twitching. He stopped beside Mason, looked up, then gently touched his snout to the boy's hand. Mason didn't speak, but he crouched just slightly until his forehead rested lightly against the top of the dog's head. For the first time since the water spill, he exhaled. Logan watched from the doorway, eyes scanning the classroom. Ms. Dalton stood at her desk, stacking papers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Ranger turned once toward her, then back to Mason. He licked the boy's wrist once, deliberate. Then he returned to Logan's heel. No one said a word, but silence had changed. It wasn't ordinary anymore, it was charged. Outside the school, Logan leaned down beside his K9 partner and clipped the leash tighter. "You saw it, didn't you?" he murmured. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just looked at the classroom door, then back at Logan. In his eyes was something sharp. Recognition. Inside Logan's pocket, his notebook waited. And now he had a new witness, one with fur and instincts sharper than any man's. The nurse's office was tucked into a quiet corner of the school between the library and the music room. The walls were painted a soft yellow, but the overhead lights still gave everything a cold, sterile edge. Peppermint lotion hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of alcohol swabs and childhood anxiety. Claire Whitlow sat behind her desk, flipping through a stack of health records. Her fingers moved precisely, years of ER experience giving her an eye for the things most people missed, especially when they tried to hide them. Mason Carter's file was thicker than it should have been. She spread the pages out on the desk, aligning dates, comparing notes. March 2nd, bruise right forearm. Reason given, fell on stairs. March 15th, cut on palm. Reason given, art supplies. April 1st, swelling in left wrist, said he tripped on pavement. April 14th, abrasions on knuckles. Gym class accident, May 8th, fingerprint-shaped bruises, faint but present. Too frequent, too vague, too familiar. She reached for her red pen and circled all the entries. In the margin she wrote a single word. Pattern. She glanced at the clock. 10 minutes until the meeting. Across campus, in a much smaller office filled with bean bags, posters about feelings, and a shelf lined with tissue boxes, Rosa Delgado, the school counselor, sat reviewing anonymous feedback forms. Her dark curls were half escaped from their usual bun, her glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose. She read another note from a 4B student, written in shaky cursive. She whispers at Mason until he cries. I heard her call him slow, another one. She told Kayla her picture looked like it was drawn by a baby. Rosa pressed her lips together. She opened a manila folder labeled Confidential, Room 4B, and added the slips inside. Down the hall, Logan Hale signed in at the front office. He wasn't on patrol today. His badge was clipped to a plain navy jacket, but his presence still drew attention. Behind him, Ranger padded along with the practiced stride of a professional who had done this too many times to be distracted by squeaky floors or the scent of juice boxes. Ms. Delgado's office is just down to the left, the secretary said. She's expecting you. As Logan walked, Ranger suddenly slowed. His ears twitched, nose lifting, eyes narrowing on something half hidden behind the recycling bin near the lockers. Logan barely noticed until Ranger veered off and nudged a crumpled sheet of notebook paper from behind the bin. The dog picked it up delicately between his teeth and trotted proudly to Logan's side. Logan took the paper. One side had been scribbled over in crayon nonsense doodles and what looked like a failed math problem. But when he turned it over, the other side had a short message, written in small block letters. She tells him he's broken. No one sees. But I do. No name. No date. Logan folded the note, jaw tight. In Rosa's office, the meeting was already underway. Claire sat stiff-backed in a chair, medical file in her lap. Rosa looked up from the folder of anonymous notes. Then Logan walked in, holding the dog-eared paper. I think we've got another one, he said, handing it over. Rosa read it quickly. Her face didn't move, but something behind her eyes changed. You think this is real? She asked. Ranger took that moment to flop down in the middle of the room and sigh with theatrical weight, tail thumping once against the floor. Claire smiled faintly. He usually does that when he knows he's right. Logan sat, the creak of the plastic chair louder than necessary. I don't think we're dealing with one isolated moment, he said. I think this has been happening for months, maybe longer. And she's careful. That's the problem. She never raises her voice. Rosa added. She never leaves a mark big enough for HR to notice. But the kids, they're changing. I can see it in the way they answer questions, how they avoid eye contact when her name comes up. Claire opened the medical file and pointed at the timeline of injuries. I've worked trauma. This is textbook. Subtle control. Psychological stress manifesting physically. A bruise here, a cut there. Just enough for doubt. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Rosa leaned forward and laid the anonymous notes on the table like playing cards. She makes me feel like I'm stupid. I don't like when she touches my shoulder. She said boys don't cry unless they're babies. She told me if I told anyone, no one would believe me. Anna Chen knocked on the door and stepped in, her son Liam waiting quietly just outside. She carried a Ziploc bag containing the pocket recorder, now labeled in black ink. Room 4B, May 8th, art class. Liam wants to help, she said softly. But he's scared. Rosa took the recorder with both hands. We'll protect him, she said. Outside, Liam made eye contact with Ranger through the open door. The dog walked over, sniffed him once, then sat beside him. Liam smiled, tentative, and reached out to pet his head. Ranger leaned into it. No bark, no wag, just wait. Steady and grounding. Inside the office, Logan pulled out his notebook and added a new line. Recovered note. Anonymous. Language matches other entries. Ranger located. Witnessed behavior changes in at least 5 students. He clicked the pen shut. This is no longer a suspicion, he said. It's a case. Claire nodded. And we build it the right way. No mistakes outside the window Wind picked up through the trees. A bell rang in the distance. School dismissed. Ranger stood, ears forward. The meeting was over, but the work had just begun. The house on Cedar Street was quiet except for the faint rattle of dishes in the kitchen and the low hum of an aging refrigerator. Liam Chen sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, his backpack opened wide beside him. His fingers hesitated as he pulled out the blue-wrapped recorder, thumb tracing the worn edges of the cracked plastic. He had hidden it under his desk for 2 days, waiting for the right moment. That moment was now. In the kitchen, Anna Chen scrubbed a pan with brisk motions, her back tight with the fatigue that comes from too many double shifts. Her dark curls had fallen loose from the knot she always tied before work, and her scrubs smelled faintly of antiseptic and cumin. "Mama?" Liam's voice was quieter than usual. She turned. One look at his face, and she dried her hands immediately. Liam held out the recorder. I taped something. At school, Anna took it slowly. "What is it?" Liam glanced toward the hallway, then leaned in. "It's Miss Dalton. She said something to Mason. I got it. I think it matters." Anna's fingers tightened around the device. She didn't ask why. She just sat on the couch, motioned for him to sit beside her, and pressed play. The recording hissed faintly. A shuffle of papers, the creak of a chair. Then Ms. Dalton's voice, as crisp as if she were in the room. "Clumsy again. No wonder everyone laughs behind your back." A pause. "You're so slow, it's like you're underwater." Liam's breath caught. Anna's eyes didn't blink. Then the whisper that cut through the static like a knife. "Don't bother telling. Kids lie, and no one listens anyway." Anna shut it off. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she stood, crossed the room, and retrieved a sandwich bag from the drawer. She slid the recorder inside like evidence from a crime scene. "Is it enough?" Liam asked. Anna looked at him. "We're going to find out." The next morning, Anna stood in the nurse's office, the red recording sealed in a small envelope. Claire Whitlow took it with the caution of someone who knew how easily systems fail children. She plugged the device into her laptop, pressed play, and let the words fill the small space. Claire's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted. Straighter, firmer. "I'm going to secure this," she said. "This can't be handled loosely." "Chain of custody matters now." Anna nodded. "Do we go to the principal?" "Not yet," Claire said. "Not until we have legal support. If this gets shut down early, it'll die in paperwork." Anna reached into her purse and handed over a second envelope. "Liam made a backup." Claire gave a thin smile. "Smart kid." Across the hall, in the guidance office, Rosa Delgado was meeting with a student when Claire entered. The look on the nurse's face told her everything. They played the recording again, this time with the door locked. When it ended, Rosa said, "She knew no one was listening." She counted on it. She was wrong, Claire said. That afternoon, Logan Hale arrived at Brookside Elementary under the pretense of reviewing SRO security protocols. It wasn't a lie. He had done the walkthroughs before. But today he lingered near the administrative wing longer than usual. Ranger stayed at his side, ears alert, tail still. Logan leaned against the bulletin board beside an open office door. Inside, Ms. Dalton was on the phone, her voice low but relaxed, confident. Logan wasn't looking at her. He was watching Ranger. The dog's ears turned sharply forward. A cue. Logan palmed his phone, tapped the audio recording shortcut, and angled it toward the half-open door. Inside, Miss Dalton laughed softly. "They're kids. Who would believe them?" She paused. "Children exaggerate. They cry if you raise your voice, and if they say something, it's their word against mine." Silence. Then, "I've been teaching for 11 years. No one questions me. Logan ended the recording, saved it under a simple name, Dalton_call1.wav. He slid his phone back into his pocket. Ranger looked up at him, unmoving, but Logan could feel the charge in the air between them. They walked out without a word. That evening, back at the house, Logan sat at the kitchen table with his notebook open. The recording had been transferred. Backups saved, labeled, filed. Tessa poured tea in the background, quiet and deliberate. "Do you think it'll be enough?" she asked. Logan didn't answer right away. "Not yet." But where close Ranger lay beneath the table. He wasn't asleep. His head rested on his paws, eyes open, ears swiveling slightly as if cataloguing every sound in the room. Logan reached down and scratched behind one ear. "You keep catching what we miss," he murmured. Ranger didn't react, but when Logan stood and walked toward Mason's room, Ranger followed. At the boy's door, Logan paused. Mason was curled up under the blanket, the robot resting on his chest. A flashlight lay beside him, still on, casting soft shadows against the wall. Logan bent, clicked the light off. Mason stirred but didn't wake. Logan stood in the hallway for a long time after that. Then he whispered, more to himself than to the dog beside him. She thought no one was listening. Ranger's tail tapped once. But we were. The wind outside rattled the gutters along Fairview Street, pushing dry leaves in uneven spirals across the sidewalk. Inside the house, the light was low, just one lamp burning in the corner of the living room, casting long amber shadows across a table covered in papers. Claire Whitlow sat with her medical file open, pages marked in red. Rosa Delgado held a folder of anonymous student notes like they were sacred documents. Anna Chen perched on the edge of the couch, both hands clasped tightly around a steaming mug of tea that had long gone cold. Tessa stood behind Logan's chair, arms folded, a pen tucked into her messy bun. She was still in her scrubs from a half shift at the clinic, but hadn't said a word about being tired. And Logan? He sat at the head of the table with his leather notebook spread wide, timelines scribbled across multiple pages, lines, arrows, names. The kind of mapping you usually saw at a crime scene. Because that's what this was now. A crime, disguised in routine. Ranger lay beneath the table, his head resting on crossed paws, eyes half-lidded, but alert. Every few minutes his ears twitched, catching something the others didn't. "I've matched Mason's medical entries to dates we now have audio or written statements for," Claire said. "They line up too cleanly to ignore." She tapped her pen against the file. March 15th. He came in with a palm injury. That same day, Zoe wrote, she made him hold the scissors too long. April 1st, swelling in the wrist. Rosa added. Malik's note said, she made him carry the box and wouldn't let go until he said sorry. Anna leaned forward. Liam's recordings are marked May 8th and May 9th. That's when Mason had the fingertip bruising. Logan turned a page. His voice was quiet but direct. She works by precision. She knows where to hurt and how to say just enough that no adult questions her. And how to stop just short of the kind of force that leaves irrefutable proof. Claire said bitterly. Rosa looked toward Ranger. Except she didn't count on him. At the sound of her voice, Ranger lifted his head. Logan reached down, letting his fingers find the familiar ridge of fur behind the shepherd's ears. He's caught every shift in Mason's body language. Every time something's off, he notices first. Tessa slid forward a set of printed student notes. These kids may not speak to adults, but they're writing the same story in different words. Rosa opened her laptop. She clicked on one of the saved files. Dalton_call1. WAV. Ms. Dalton's voice came through smooth, calm, dismissive. They're kids. Who would believe them? Claire's face tightened. And that's when Ranger growled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was low, from deep in the chest, and it stopped every conversation in the room. The growl grew louder when the next line played. Children exaggerate. They cry if you look at them too long. It's their word against mine. Ranger rose from his place, tail stiff, eyes locked on the laptop, as if the voice itself were something he could track. Then the growl ceased. He looked up at Logan and stepped closer, pressing his head against Logan's leg, grounding him. I'm not sure what unnerves me more, Anna said, voice shaky. Her voice, or how clearly he understands what's happening. Logan placed a hand on Ranger's neck, feeling the steady thrum of muscle under his fingers. He knows when something's wrong. Doesn't need words. Tessa leaned down and picked up a pencil that had rolled from the table. She's going to deny all of it. Rosa nodded. That's why we have to walk this carefully. We bring it through the right channel, not to the principal, not yet. Straight to Child Protective Services and Legal Counsel, Claire pulled out a manila envelope marked Evidence Chain. She placed the recorder inside, sealed it, and signed the label. This isn't just about Mason anymore, she said. Other kids are starting to show similar signs. Anna reached for her purse. She pulled out a sheet of notebook paper, folded 4 times. My son, he gave me this after school today. She unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but readable. She told Kayla she draws like a baby. Then Kayla cried in the bathroom. I heard it. Claire sighed. More trauma, more silence. Logan added a new line to his notebook. May 11th, new note from Liam. Witnessed emotional impact on Kayla Ortiz, signs of pattern extending beyond Mason. He paused, then drew a circle around Kayla's name, then one around Mason's, then Zoe, Malik, Liam, lines connecting them all. And at the center, one name. He boxed it in dark ink. Dalton. Ranger let out a long breath under the table. Not a growl this time. Not a sigh. Just the sound of waiting. By the time the meeting ended, the room felt heavier than when it had begun. Evidence sat in sealed envelopes. Audio files had been transferred. Claire had drafted the official report. Logan stood, stretched the stiffness from his shoulders. She thinks she's safe behind tenure, behind charm, behind the assumption that adults won't believe children. She doesn't understand, Rosa said, rising beside him, that some of us listen better than others. And some of us, Tessa added, glancing at Ranger, don't need to hear words to know the truth. Ranger stood and walked to the front door, waiting without command. He didn't bark, but no one needed him to. His silence had weight, and this time it would be heard. The district office didn't usually feel like a battleground, but this morning it did. The air inside the glass-paneled meeting room was cool and sharp, the kind that made people sit straighter and breathe slower. Tension had teeth. On one side of the long mahogany table sat the school board, 5 members in muted suits, their expressions unreadable, not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't afford to show they did. The district attorney's representative sat among them, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed. At the far end, Ms. Dalton entered in a powder blue blazer, hair pinned, smile rehearsed. She moved like she belonged here, as if this were just a routine check-in. She gave a small, calculated nod to the board, then turned to Claire and offered a smile so polite it almost glittered. Logan watched her, jaw tight. Anna sat next to him, clutching a folder to her chest. Rosa tapped her pen against a yellow legal pad, one leg bouncing under the table. Tessa stood by the door, arms crossed. Behind her, Ranger lay in a quiet sphinx pose, his eyes fixed on the woman in blue. Dalton's attorney adjusted his glasses. We appreciate the board's time. My client has come voluntarily and is prepared to clarify any misunderstandings. The board chair nodded. Let's proceed. Ms. Delgado, you may begin Rosa Rose. Her voice was steady, no theatrics. We're presenting evidence of repeated psychological and physical mistreatment by a staff member, namely Ms. Dalton, toward multiple students under her care. The findings are based on medical reports, written accounts, and audio recordings collected over the past 6 months. Dalton didn't flinch. She looked bored. Until Rosa played the first clip. Zoe's voice came through the speakers, shaky but clear. She said I was slow and made me stay after lunch. She told Mason that boys don't cry. And when I said my arm hurt, she said I was being dramatic. The room held its breath. Dalton's lawyer lifted a hand. With respect, this is hearsay from a child. Rosa cut in. Backed by a pediatrician's report of bruising and an anonymous peer note recorded that same day. The pattern is consistent. More pages were handed around, photos, reports, timeline logs. Then came the second clip. Liam's recording. Dalton's voice this time. Low, patronizing. Do you want to be the weird kid? Because you're acting like the weird kid. This time. A flicker in Dalton's expression. Her lips twitched, just once. Anna stood and addressed the board. We're not presenting one incident. We're showing a systematic pattern. Children who didn't know each other wrote similar words. Mason alone has 6 different injuries, all logged within days of reported encounters with her. Dalton's hands folded tighter in her lap. The third clip played. Dalton again. He tripped. Clumsy again, it was short, cold, but in context, with Mason's torn palm and the placement of bruises, it landed like a gut punch. Silence wrapped the room. Even Ranger stood now. No bark, no growl. Just stood, eyes locked on Dalton. Dalton's smile cracked. She's 5, Anna said, her voice soft now. Kayla. The girl you mocked about her drawing. She didn't want to come to school last week. Told her mum she'd rather stay in her room forever. I've taught for 15 years, Dalton replied, voice trembling for the first time. Children are dramatic. They make up stories. They fall. They bruise. They blame Logan leaned forward. They don't record lies. They don't fake matching injuries. They don't whisper to each other in bathrooms to protect someone who scares them. You underestimated them, and you underestimated him. He gestured toward Ranger. Dalton's eyes darted to the dog. For the first time in her career, she looked afraid. I'm sorry, she whispered, almost too quiet to hear. I didn't mean... You did, Claire said flatly. And we can prove it. The board murmured. The chair raised a hand for silence. We will deliberate. For now, Ms. Dalton is placed on immediate administrative leave, pending formal investigation. Dalton stood, shaky. Outside the glass, a small group of parents had gathered, none hostile, just watching. One mother held her son's hand a little tighter. Another wiped her eyes. Dalton's heel caught on the carpet as she turned to leave. Ranger stepped forward, not blocking her, not aggressive, just there, silent, unmoving, present. She hesitated, then stepped around him, and that, somehow, said more than anything else that day. Afterward, in the quiet hallway, Rosa exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. We're not done, she said. No. Logan agreed, placing a hand on Ranger's back. But we just tipped the first domino. Inside the hearing room, the board members sat in silence. On the table before them lay 2 things, a sealed evidence folder and a small red recorder. The final word didn't come from a person. It came from a recording, and it echoed longer than any argument Dalton had tried to make. There was a different kind of silence in room 4B that morning. It wasn't heavy or afraid. It wasn't that sharp, watchful quiet that used to fall the moment Dalton stepped inside. This silence felt open, gentle, like the air was finally safe to breathe. Mr. Keller stood at the front, tall but relaxed, sleeves rolled up, and a crooked smile beneath his salt and pepper beard. He didn't write his name in block letters on the whiteboard. Instead, he handed out index cards. "I want to know who you are," he said, his voice warm. "Not just your name, but what makes you laugh, what makes you curious, what makes you you." The kids blinked at him like he was speaking another language. Then slowly, pens moved. Mason glanced at Claire for reassurance. She gave him a tiny nod. Mr. Keller continued talking as they wrote. "I don't expect perfect spelling or neat handwriting. I just want real answers. I want to know what you think about when it's quiet, when no one's watching." By the time recess rolled around, something had shifted. Kayla had drawn a picture of her cat. Zoe wrote that she wanted to be a weather scientist. Even Mason, who once couldn't get through a sentence without his voice cracking, wrote something and tucked it into the pile. Claire had stepped into the room halfway through, watching quietly from the back. Mr. Keller spotted her and smiled, as if to say, "You were right to hope." That afternoon, Logan parked his truck in the visitor lot, Ranger seated upright beside him in the passenger seat, ears perked. "Ready, partner?" Logan asked, rubbing behind Ranger's ears. Ranger gave a soft chuff and leapt down, tail high. When they entered the school, it didn't take long for the whispers to start. "That's him. Is that the dog from the news? I saw him on TikTok." But as Logan and Ranger entered room 4B, everything hushed again. And this time, the silence was sacred. Mr. Keller gave a respectful nod. "Everyone, this is Ranger. He's not just a dog, he's a veteran, a protector." A hero Ranger sat at attention beside Logan, head slightly tilted, watching the children with curiosity and something else calm recognition. Claire knelt beside Mason and whispered, "You want to say hi?" Mason hesitated. Then slowly he rose, took 3 careful steps forward, and extended his hand. Ranger leaned in, sniffed once, then nudged Mason's palm with his nose. The boy's fingers curled instinctively, stroking the fur between Ranger's eyes. Gasps rippled through the room, not from fear, but from awe. Zoe followed next. Then Kayla. Then Jeremy, who used to cry before lunch. They circled Ranger, some crouching, others hugging gently, as if he were a living legend. And he was. Not because he barked or chased or bit, but because he listened. And because in the worst moments he stood still when no one else did. Mr. Keller invited Logan to speak. The man hesitated. He wasn't used to crowds, let alone classrooms. But then he told them about silence. The kind that saves lives. And the kind that hurts people. You know the difference, right? The kids nodded, some more slowly than others. But there's another kind. Logan added, the silence that lets you be seen. Heard, like right now. That's what Ranger's here for. Anna was watching from the door. Her eyes glistened. She didn't need to say anything. This was what justice looked like. Not a courtroom. Not paperwork. This. Kayla raised her hand. Can Ranger come every Friday? Laughter broke out. Even Logan smiled, one of those rare, uneven smiles that caught him off guard. Mr. Keller turned to Claire. What do you think, Principal Taylor? Claire crossed her arms, pretending to consider it. I think he just got promoted to honorary staff. The kids cheered. Ranger didn't react the way a pet might have. He simply stood, turned in a slow circle, and settled in the center of the reading rug, surrounded by cushions and crayons. As class resumed, Mason did something no one expected. He raised his hand. Not halfway, not timidly, all the way up. Yes, Mason? Mr. Keller asked. I think I want to try reading today." Out loud there was a pause. Then Mr. Keller handed him a thin book and walked with him to the front. Mason held it with 2 hands, took a breath, and read. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled, repeated a word, but he read. And in the silence that followed his last sentence, no one clapped. Because no one wanted to break it, that new kind of silence, the one that meant peace. The room was quiet, lit only by the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds. Ranger lay curled at Logan's feet, paws tucked beneath his chest, head resting on the floor. Every so often, his tail gave a slow, steady thump against the rug, as if confirming, "I'm still here." Logan held a piece of notebook paper in his hands, the edges frayed, the handwriting large and uneven but determined. "Dear Ranger," it began, "when I was scared to speak, you sat next to me. You didn't tell me to be brave, you just stayed, and that made me want to try. I read my first book out loud because you were there. Thank you. Love." Mason Logan folded the note carefully and placed it in the wooden box on his desk labeled Keepers. Across the room, Mason slept curled up on the beanbag chair, no robot gripped tight to his chest tonight. His breathing was even, his fingers relaxed, the faintest smile still on his face. On the whiteboard, someone had left a post-it in purple ink. "You grew 1 inch of courage today." T. Logan smiled. He didn't need to guess who wrote it. Tessa had always understood the quiet victories, the ones you couldn't photograph or post online, the ones that happened slowly, then all at once. He opened his old leather notebook, the one with frayed pages and coffee rings on the cover. He flipped past pages filled with numbers, training schedules, old war zone maps, and then a newer section entries filled with names like Anna, Claire, Mason, Rosa, and Ranger. He wrote, "Sometimes all it takes is 1 child, 1 dog, and 1 person who refuses to stay silent." Ranger stirred and lifted his head. His eyes met Logan's, and something passed between them. Not a command, not even a request, just understanding. He hadn't barked for attention, or for reward. He barked for the broken, for those who couldn't speak yet, for those who needed someone to sit beside them in the dark and say, "Without words, I see you." Outside, the school bell rang its final tone for the week. Children's voices filtered through the open window, laughing, shouting, alive. Logan stood, stretched, and opened the door. Ranger rose beside him. They walked down the hallway slowly. The walls were lined with new drawings, some of Ranger, some of superheroes, some of children holding hands. Hope colored in crayon. As they passed the office, Claire gave Logan a wave. Behind her, a framed photo had been added to the wall. Ranger with the whole class, sitting proudly in the center, tongue out, eyes bright. Mr. Keller had written beneath it, "Faculty Advisor, Ranger." They stepped out into the parking lot, and Logan paused to let Ranger sniff the breeze. Autumn was coming. The air was crisp, but not cold yet. When they reached the truck, Logan opened the passenger door, but Ranger didn't jump in right away. He sat, scanning the yard, watching, always watching. A few kids saw them and came running. "Bye, Ranger. See you Monday. Don't forget us." Ranger wagged his tail once, slow and measured, and then he climbed into the truck, circled once, and lay down. Logan started the engine but didn't pull out right away. He looked at the school one last time, at the building that had once held nothing but pain, now filled with the sound of children reclaiming it. He pulled onto the road, the sun dipping low behind them. As they drove, the radio played softly, some old blues tune that reminded Logan of home. He reached over and scratched behind Ranger's ears. "You didn't bark for glory," he said. "You barked for the truth." And that was enough, because truth echoed. It rippled out like a bark in a canyon. One voice, one moment, that could wake the whole world. So now I ask you, who's been your Ranger? What story do you carry with a loyal dog by your side? Share it with us, because somewhere out there, another kid needs to know they're not alone. If this story moved you, don't just scroll past. Like, share, subscribe to the German Shepherd channel, because sometimes one bark can save a life, and sometimes one click can carry that bark further than you ever imagined.